Okay, then we'll get started. So welcome everybody to this webinar today. I hope you can all hear me well. So this is a webinar for SUSFOOD, which is the Aranet Co-Fund on Sustainable Food Production and Consumption. And I'm happy to welcome you today to a special webinar for the transnational call for research proposals, which is ongoing at the moment. So we're in the middle of the process, and I'm very happy to start. How do I get to the next slide? Oh yeah, thank you very much. So first of all, your general contact point for any questions that you have around the call is the SUSFOOD call office. So I'm Nicola. So you probably know me already. Maybe you have written to me or heard the first webinar that we gave in February this year. So I'm part of the SUSFOOD call office, and we're there for you if you have any questions about the process, about the rules, about the requirements, technical problems. Please contact us. That's what we're there for, and you have the contacts here. Thank you. The call timeline, as I said, we're now in step 2. So you have already done a lot of work on your proposals, on your pre-proposals. And at the moment, we're at the beginning of step 2, where you do the full proposal preparation. And you have time to do this until 8th of September. And afterwards, there will be evaluation and the selection of the successful proposals then to start their projects. So in brief, the call topics of this call, we have 4 topics, and the scope of SUSFOOD is research all along the food chain beyond primary production. So we have 4 topics in this call about processing technologies, about resource efficiency and reduction of waste, about consumer behavior, and about assessment of sustainability in brief. So all of you have a project that is dedicated to one of these topics. There are several important documents that you should be aware of. So first of all, the call announcement that was published at the beginning of the call. Then there is guidelines for full proposals, so that is new. You should have a good look at that. And in addition, we also have a paper on communication and dissemination. So how to do this communication plan that is needed. You can download all these documents at the submission platform. And today we will focus on the communication and dissemination. So this is new. In the full proposal, it is required to do a communication and dissemination plan, and it should be a maximum 2-page document, and you can enter it directly into the submission system. So you don't have to upload a Word document or something. You enter it directly, and this is very important. And this webinar today is really focused on this, and we will learn more about it from CombiBiz. So I'm really happy that we have communication experts that support us in this and that will now guide you how to do a good communication and dissemination plan. So thank you very much, and I hand over to Rhonda from CombiBiz, who will now tell you more about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola, very much indeed for that very good introduction. And welcome to our attendees here. We've got nearly 60 attendees, which is a very good turnout. So you've passed the first hurdle. So a little bit about CombiBiz, a little bit about me, just to begin. Why are we partnering with SUSFOOD? More importantly, why have SUSFOOD agreed for us to be involved in this area? CombiBiz is a Horizon 2020 project which is focused on supporting researchers within the bioeconomy, which is everything from food and agriculture all the way through forestry, marine and biotechnology, to ensure that they are transferring the knowledge that they are generating throughout their projects out to the correct stakeholders, i.e. those parties, those individuals who have potential to utilize the knowledge that is being transferred. So that's the rationale behind CombiBiz, and we're delighted to have been partnering with SUSFOOD in order to ensure that communications and dissemination and the importance of these activities are not lost in the excitement of the research proposals that you are presenting to SUSFOOD, hopefully successfully. So next slide, please. So just a little bit about me. So I'm the coordinator of CombiBiz, and my company is Minerva. We're based in the UK, and our focus is very much on supporting campaigns, organisations, projects to make sure that their voice is heard in whichever quarters it's required in order to deliver the desired result. My background is publishing and public relations, and this field of the whole bioeconomy is a very exciting one and really important one. We really do feel that we're helping to make a difference in the field of innovation in order to help ensure projects reach their full potential. And that's what I hope you'll get out of this session today. Next slide, please. So we're working in partnership to help deliver impact. But just a word of warning, we are not in this session going to tell you exactly what your communications and dissemination plan should look like. It is a working session in order to help you think through how you are going to go about shaping up your communications and dissemination plan, hopefully bringing out for you some of the key questions that are required to be answered before you can be sure that you've delivered an effective plan that will really add value to your proposal. Next slide, please. So in partnership, as Nicola has already said, there's expected to be a 2-page dissemination communication plan, which must also include a plan to communicate with the wider public. And I think what's really important is that you are clear about the distinction between dissemination and communications, and that you demonstrate that you've strategically thought through and allocated the appropriate resources and budget to the work that you are envisaging throughout this area of work. So we're providing guidelines and examples, but as I said, there is no magic bullet. This is really something you need to work through very clearly with all your partners in order to ensure that you are doing justice to the research funding that's going to be available to you. You will have this webinar, and you will be invited to attend a communications workshop as part of the kickoff if you are successful. One thing that it is important, I think, to stress is that the EC is much better organised now than it ever has been in order to help research projects to gain greater visibility and awareness of what they're doing. So do please make sure that in your planning you actually look at what is available via the EC, via their different platforms. They'll be delighted to hear from you, and if you think you've got a topic and a project that is going to really create quite an impact in the media or in your particular segment, do let them know, because they can help you loudspeaker the work that you're doing in a very effective way. So next slide, please. So just to reinforce what exactly is expected here. I'm sorry, I've got a long headline at the top there. This should be SUSFOOD. You need a 2-page plan which should provide a narrative, i.e. your rationale as to how you've gone about creating your plan. It should include a list of priority stakeholders, your messages, your actions, and your timetable. And then, importantly, your key performance indicators. What are your measures of success? How will you know that you are winning? How will you know that you are getting anywhere near reaching the targets that you have set yourself? So in this webinar, which we expect to only run for about an hour, if it's longer than that, then probably your attention will waver. So our agenda is, so next slide please. We're going to look a little bit at communications and dissemination, and I would like to propose that what we aim to do with this is to create a continuum between the two. That's the first phase of this seminar. The second is to look at more detail about creating that strategic communications plan, the who, why, what and when. We need some detail to show that you have actually thought this through. The third section will look a bit at project support and resources. What exactly you're going to do, how much money do you need, what resources are required, and who is going to lead this area of work. And then section 4, monitoring, measuring and adapting. How do we know we're making progress? So let's turn straight away then to this thinking about communications and dissemination. Next slide, please. Communications and dissemination. So let's first look at dissemination. Usually, dissemination is focused on the results, i.e. the results of the project, which might be interim or they might be final. And these results could be in the form of an actual product. It could be guidance for policymakers. It could be a new way of scientific thinking. So that's usually where dissemination is pitched. It's to specialist audiences, i.e. potential users of the information that you are generating. And it's usually for specialist outlets and for presenting at specialist meetings. In the scientific community, we know that, of course, the peer review process is mainly where the attention lies, and this is important, of course, for your own careers, for your own units, and of course for the project. But let's think about it as a starting point rather than an end point. Particularly as often these peer-reviewed papers, publications, are going to be published at the end of the project rather than throughout the life of the project. And of course, the impact factors of those journals are important to you, but actually outside the scientific community, in order to create impact, then we have to think about outreach. And these peer-reviewed articles very much as a starting point, a really strong piece of collateral that you can work with. And of course, dissemination is very focused on raising the profile of you as scientists, your group and your institute, as well as, of course, the research issue that you are addressing. And quite often there's a real focus on securing more funds. Let's say it's your day job, basically. You as a scientist are very focused on the dissemination end of this spectrum. And that's important, but it's not the only thing that is important. Next slide, please. Because communications is what's going to help you get to a real impact factor for the project overall, and to help you secure greater utilization of the knowledge that you're generating. Now, communications, and this is really true in Horizon 2020, is that it has to start from the very beginning. The content that you're working with is much more about the question your research is asking, the solution it is trying to find, the unmet need that it's addressing, and why this question is relevant and are important for you, me, and perhaps even for the planet. It's also about how that question is being answered. What are the tools and tactics that you're using in order to go about finding that solution? And importantly, the human face, the profiles of the people who are doing the asking and the answering and where they're doing it. Even technical and specialist journals are always interested in hearing about individuals and the research that they're doing. Nothing to do with the potential results, but to do with the process of the research, the story that the research is telling, and so on. But probably by now you can see that this requires a very different mindset and a very different language to the whole dissemination process. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to propose that actually communications and dissemination are two sides of the same coin, and your plan should demonstrate that there's a continuum between those two areas of important work, which are both focused on delivering knowledge transfer to diverse audiences at different times and in different ways. So let's not segment it, let's not divide, let's not create silos. Let's ensure that the whole plan is focused on utilising both areas of this work, seeing both as starting points and both contributing to the transfer of knowledge, raising awareness and the drive towards utilisation of the work that you are delivering. Next slide, please. So, communications is our focus here on this webinar. This is not to say that dissemination is important, it's vital, but communications is our focus in this workshop, and indeed as it is for Horizon 2020. Those of you involved in Horizon 2020 projects will know that as part of the grant agreement, communicating your project is defined as the beneficiaries, i.e. that's you, must promote the action and its results by providing targeted information to multiple audiences, including the media and the public, in a strategic and effective manner, and possibly engaging in a two-way exchange. So this brings out actually some really important points. Next slide, please. So communications is our focus, and here are some, if you like, definitions of what we mean by science communications. It's the sharing of scientific work and its results products in a format which is designed for and understandable by your intended audience. So that indicates that one size does not fit all, that if you've got one kind of audience, you're going to need to pull out and present information in one kind of way, whereas with another, you perhaps a more specialist audience, you can be designing your engagement activities in a much more detailed and much more technical way. Second quote, any means by which scientific theory or practices are shared and heard. The important word here for communications effectiveness is that word heard. So much activity is focused on sharing information, very little usually is looking at how well a message has been received, has been heard, received, and hopefully interested and maybe even acted on. Third quote, science communication is making complicated concepts accessible for the general public. If you make information about what you're doing, no matter how technical, as accessible as it can be, it will of course be suitable for the general public, but will be also suitable for any kind of specialist audience, remembering now that audiences have become more and more specialized. So the more you can come up with a really strong general concept and general message about your work, you are much more likely to capture the attention and interest of a wide range of audiences. Fourth quote, vital here. Science communication is taking research out of the lab and into the wider arena, and potentially influencing perspectives of the world around us. With your research, with the innovation that you are developing, this is really important in the sense that if you are going to influence all those wider stakeholders out there, then you need to join with those stakeholders very early on and ensure that you bring them in with you on the journey to the development of that knowledge, to make sure it doesn't suddenly come as a surprise at the end of your project that you've come up with this very innovative way of food processing, a new food ingredient that comes as a complete surprise to all the stakeholders, and in a way that means it's much more likely to be rejected. So think about influencing, engaging, supporting, involvement of each of those audiences early on in your project. And of course, there it is that I've said it there, the last piece of text on that slide. For SUSFOOD, ensuring that the concepts and products emerging from your successfully funded projects are accepted, supported, and utilized. What you don't want is the best idea in the world, the best new product in the world, and it will not be taken up by retailers, it won't be taken up by consumers, because it's too new, it hasn't been talked about, it hasn't been introduced in an appropriate way. Next slide, please. So, having thought about how we're going to create communications and dissemination as a continuum, one building on the other, we need to be thinking really clearly now about our strategic communications action plan. The who, the why, the what, and the when. Who do we need to engage with and why? Who are your stakeholders? And you're going to have lots of those, so you need to prioritize them. What do we know about these stakeholders? That's really important. We need some intelligence about that group so that we can communicate and provide actions and activities, information appropriate for them. And what is it that we want to tell them and when? What is our core message for that group, and how are we going to get it to them and in what order? So a little exercise now. Next slide, please. So the first question about stakeholders. Let's look at it as a target. And usually we can divide our stakeholders up into 3 groups. Our priority stakeholder targets, our second priority, and our third. So in the chat panel, perhaps you'd like to make some suggestions, first of all, about who you see as your priority number 1 stakeholder group. Give you a couple of minutes to do that. Minerva, can you expand the section where I can see people making, I can't seem to see it. Where do I need to click, please? I can't see the questions panel at the moment. Sorry about that. We're just going to, one of my colleagues is going to read out your suggestions. So in the meantime, think about priority 2. Who are your priority 2 stakeholders? Give you a few minutes for that one as well. Okay, and then think about priority 3. Okay, so we've got some good results here. Some people have put in stakeholder groups without a number, but we've got consumers, we've got retailers, consumers, food processing industry, number 1, producers, number 2, consumers, number 3, retailers, agricultural machine, manufacturers, farmers, feeder, industry, I think that should be. Food consumers, policymakers, food industry. Okay, so you can see that there people have answered in a very broad way. What's really important for your communications plan is to really think very clearly, logically, where it is that you need to put your priority efforts. Because that way, that will then help you drive the design of your actions that build that up. Because the next question we need to ask, next slide please. Why? Why are these stakeholders your priority targets? Because you need to understand that clearly. So for example, if you think that regulators are your most important priority target, is that because at the moment you're proposing something that is not accepted in terms of an ingredient? Is it something that needs a health claim, for example, that's going to make a difference? Is it maybe the source of your broad product that requires regulation? So you need to be engaging with policymakers, understand how policymakers work and how all the barriers and challenges you're going to come across. If, for example, your project is focused very much on a technical question, i.e. it's about improving the manufacture or the production of a particular element in food processing, or maybe even a piece of engineering, then of course you're going to need to talk to the actual manufacturers to find out why it is that your idea and your potential end product is going to be a good solution for them. So when you make your list of your stakeholders, be very clear as to why you need to be in contact with these stakeholders. That will help you then to draw your direct line as to how you're going to communicate with them and when. Next slide, please. This is really important. What do you know about them? So, for example, some of you have put consumers down as potentially priority number one. If it's priority number one, if consumers are priority number one, how are you going to find out well enough what those consumers think about your new proposition, whether it's a new food itself, or whether it's a new ingredient, or a new mix of ingredients, or a new proposition for an existing food that's more sustainable? What are your tactics that are going to help you find out more? The more you can find out about the groups that you are addressing, the better your chances of communicating more effectively with them, raising awareness and delivering a better result with them. Next slide, please. So once you've done that, you need to be clear about the message that you are going to be communicating to that particular group. What is it that you want policymakers to know about? What is it that you want food manufacturers to know about? What is it that consumers need to know about your new product? What is your new proposition here? And the more targeted you can make it, again, the more effective you're going to be in order to delivering that message, and hopefully bring that stakeholder group and individual representatives from that stakeholder group along the journey with you to success. And then the final question, next slide please, that you need to ask yourself is to when is the best time? You'll know that again in Horizon 2020 a key focus is on multi-actor engagement. So whilst there is an expectation that you will deal with multiple audiences, it doesn't mean to say that you need to deal and communicate with each of those multiple audiences all at the same time. There is probably going to be a better time for you to be communicating with key players, for example regulators, or food manufacturers, or indeed consumers. So again, ask yourself a question about how you're going to build in over your timeline the best time to be communicating with these particular groups. Okay, so the next part of this equation is the project support and resources that you need in order to deliver an effective communications plan. What, how much, and who. So how can we reach these stakeholders? What are the channels that you can utilize in order to reach those stakeholder groups? What do we need to create or provide for those groups? What's the collateral? What are the materials that are going to influence and engage and raise awareness with them? And how much will it cost and who will provide it? i.e., where are the resources going to come from in order to help you deliver this plan? So next slide, please. So what do we mean by communications channels? This is really because of the multiple number of channels now available to us to communicate. This obviously presents a very, very great opportunity for communicators, but also is a huge challenge. We're going to need to make some judgments as to the best channels that we need to utilize. Next slide, please. So the communications channels, they're multiple. So on the left-hand side of the screen are the wider channels, if you like, the multi-actors, the major loudspeaker channels that can be utilized. There's the television, but it's also online and catch up too, which actually makes television and that even more a potential cascade channel for you that's going to be highly effective. Don't discard radio. Radio now in a global perspective is very, very popular, with many people now accessing radio stations online, and you don't actually have to be in the geography in which the program is being broadcast. Obviously video and YouTube, we know that's winning hands down in terms of the fact that a live, moving or static image actually wins very much in terms of gaining people's attention and raising awareness, providing that first step into a communications exchange. We know from research that if you're at a meeting and people are presenting information, both visually and in text, you are about 70% more likely to remember the things that you see, i.e. the pictures, the images, the videos, and so on. And what's important, they say that you've got a room full of 100 people in your meeting. They are more likely to remember what they see than what they hear, but also we are much more likely to remember the same things in common. Okay, so people will remember an image in common in a given situation, about 70% from, and there's been a lot of robust research on this. But in terms of what we remember, what we hear, we will on average remember about 10%, but each of us will actually remember a different 10%. So again, the effectiveness is much less sustained. Of course, social media again provides us with a very useful first step engagement mechanisms, and again the channels you have to choose carefully according to what you're going to use. And a really important indicator here is all the major institutions, agencies at EU level, but also global level and national level are using Twitter now much more effectively. So it's important that you, again, think about which social media channels you're going to use, how you're going to utilize them, and what resources you're going to place in them, because obviously these can be very time consuming. On the right hand side are what you might call more traditional outlets. There's the traditional newspaper, magazine, literature, which are important if you are raising a new concept, wanting to test out with consumers and consumer groups in the wider sense what you're doing, then obviously these channels can be incredibly effective. Specialist outlets are really important. Even if a newsletter is only going to be read by 100, 200 people, that can be much more important to you and the results you want to deliver in communications terms than if you make the front page of the newspaper. So do not discard very select, very specialist outlets. Make sure you know about them. What is it that each of your stakeholder groups are reading? What do they think are the authorities in their particular areas? Who are the thought leaders in those particular sectors? Where do they write? Who are they writing for, and where are they being published? The more intelligence you can gather on this side, the more effective you're going to be. Next slide, please. So project support and resources. We've got about communications channels, but what do we need to create and provide? Next slide, please. So again, with communications collateral activities, again, the choice is huge. So we can be very specialized if it's something that we want to gain the attention of maybe those people in school or academic environments. Maybe there is a place for school visits, some real interface to gain some reaction, some feedback, or indeed at the right time to present the results of the work that you've been doing. There could be an element of competition that could be very helpful for you. Obviously, live video links, very, very successful, where you can create a really interesting link, maybe a scientist in their lab demonstrating how they're manipulating certain bits of machinery, or indeed utilizing different ingredients. Science fairs and exhibitions in terms of wider communication can also be very effective for you, again, trying to gauge public opinion, public feedback about the proposition that you're working on. There may be some element that could be utilized in your project regarding citizen science, becoming ever more important and part of the toolbox of many areas of science, where they're actually utilizing person power in order to collect data or to collect feedback. This might be a mechanism that might work for you. Obviously, interactive and online, you cannot do without it these days. You really have to build in how you're going to work up your website, what are you going to put on your website that's going to help attract and engage. Anything from an animation, or it could be a more serious gaming or a competition. Personal opinions or personal endorsement of individuals or thought leaders can also be incredibly helpful in terms of websites and so on. If you really are dealing in a brand new area and you really want to hit hard policymakers, regulators, as well as raising awareness of potential among different food and food manufacturing sectors, then maybe in your project there's a place for a white paper where you're really pulling key information together, where you're representing different perspectives in one place, so that if you are an MEP, for example, in European Parliament, from a country that is particularly interested in an aspect of sustainable food, maybe it's supporting traditional diets, then if you can provide a document that provides a holistic look at that issue, then that MEP will be much more interested in taking that to the committees they sit on, to maybe even supporting you in having a exhibition or some kind of reception in the Parliament, whether it's European level or national level. That could be extremely helpful to you in pressing your claim forwards. One tactic that can work extremely well is to pull together an expert roundtable meeting, again where you have representatives of the key stakeholder groups coming together in order to debate, discuss, agree a report that again endorses the drive that you are making in terms of this new innovation and taking it forward. Next slide, please. Communications is as much about engaging the emotions as it is about engaging the brain. So it's the interaction between brain and heart, if you like. And if in some way you can utilize wider communications tactics, whether it's in the form of art, whether it's in terms of an engagement activity, maybe with children or indeed with adults, why should the children have all the fun? Then that will also help you in order to drive your proposition forward. But again, just be aware that you need to be able to justify the amount of time and the amount of money that you're going to invest in any of these pieces of collateral. But don't forget the emotional aspect, particularly in the arena that you're working on, which is food. We all know that if we're in the right frame of mind and we're in the right environment, we enjoy food better. And I think it's at your peril that you fail to acknowledge that aspect of food research. It isn't just about the facts, it's also about how we feel about the food, how we feel about changing our dietary habits, about how we think about new products that are coming on the shelves, and why we would think about changing the way our food purchasing patterns in order to create more sustainable diets, more sustainable food production and food chain system. So in the plan, the document that we prepared, we put in a core questions for a core and dissemination plan, which hopefully we've gone through in this webinar. But I think if you are very clear about how you're going to answer these questions, then I think you're well on the way to having a robust, thought through, validated communications dissemination plan. So you've got to think about the group, priorities 1, 2, and 3. You've got to think about the core message. You've got to think about what we know about each of the groups, what's their current level of knowledge, understanding of the proposal idea, how can we reach that group, what collateral do we need, when's the best time, now how much will this cost, how much will contact with each of these groups cost, what are the resources that we need to fulfill these answers. And I would suggest that the most important thing you need to think about in order to deliver success is that the core message has got to be relevant to the core group that you are addressing. Next slide, please. Because relevance is the first step to engagement. As researchers and projects, there's an awful lot that you'll want to say. As you'll see in the circle and the chap on the top, he's got an awful lot to say. But the person who's receiving all of that information is not as interested in the whole proposal, in the whole project. You've got to tap in to what they're interested in, and there will be overlap there, as you can see in the middle, and if you focus on what is relevant for each of those groups, then you will be much more effective in the way that you shape your messages, in the way that you shape your actions and your activities, and ensure that you are reaching the groups that you need to reach. So next slide, please. So what does this mean in terms of making it relevant? Well, try and make sure that it actually tells people, your messages and your actions and your collateral tells people something that's relevant to their daily life, potentially to their own interests. And their own interests can, of course, be commercial as well as social or environmental. If it's somehow linked to family, children, to longevity of the proposition that you're making, that again can support the emotional element of the communications that you're making. Lifestyle and dietary choice is huge for your area of food. So again, be trying to be thinking about the impact of the work you're doing on how it might influence lifestyles and dietary choices. And of course, it could be important for professional development. So for example, with a policy player, if you're introducing to them a brand new area of work, what's going to be trending in a particular area, or a new proposition in terms of horizon scanning, then that's going to be of interest to them. And of course, if it's a purely real commercial proposition, a new widget that's going to make the manufacture of a particular kind of food more effective, more efficient, then of course that's the message that you need to be putting out. So next slide, please. So this is an area not to forget. How are you going to monitor, measure and adapt, the work that you are delivering in this area? What are the measures of success, your KPIs? How are you monitoring your progress? And when will you review and consider adapting your plan? i.e., what's your action points that you've learned and taken away from the work that you've delivered already? So we'll look at these briefly. Next slide, please. Because I think the trick here is to not think in terms of KPIs, is not to think outputs, but to think outcomes. It wasn't so long ago that it was sufficient to say, we're going to print 1,000 brochures. But we need to think further now in terms of effectiveness. We need to understand where those 1,000 brochures have gone, who's actually received them, who's actually read them, and what action have they taken as a result of the visit to the website perhaps that's been generated by the brochure. As a result, for example, of a webinar, obviously the number of attending is important, and obviously those who look at a recorded webinar, which this one of course also is, so you can go back and look at it again. But actually, how are we going to measure whether we've actually made any progression with those individuals attending the webinar? What are they going to do next? Have they signed up for a next webinar? Have they actually put into action some of the information that had been presented on the webinar? So I think if you bear in mind any material or any action that you are planning, that you also have this in mind. What are the outcomes? What are your measures of success, not only your outputs? So Twitter, for example, yes, it gives you a strong landscape, but what's most important is actually what do people who follow you and maybe click on some links, what do they do next? Obviously, it's great if they like and they retweet, but it's a very easy thing to do. We're looking at core outcomes here, so that's what we're looking for, real action. And we can visualize this in what we might call the message chain. If you can, next slide. So, in the message chain, this is really important. If you've got your message and you know where you're going to send it, you obviously need to check that it's been sent. But the next part in the chain, has it been received? And you need to have some kind of mechanism to check that it's been received. The third part in the message chain is, has that message been understood? Has the relevance of the message that you've been delivering to different stakeholder groups been understood, and why it's relevant to that particular group? And then, of course, the epitome is if they've taken that message, what have they done as a result of that? Have they taken some action, which might be to raid, maybe they've taken the topic and put it onto the agenda of the meeting that they're next going to within their company, within their consumer group, within the committee that they sit on in the European Parliament, for example. And then, of course, the final step in the chain is if that's been adopted. You know, if people look at that and they say, well, this is something we need to take further, we need to therefore think about how we're going to changing our ways, changing our consumer behavior, changing our policy and regulation in order to make this happen. So always have that broader picture in mind, because what we want to do, next slide please, is to ensure that we have a return on our investment in communications. And a really core way of doing this is to make sure that every single time we communicate, we are doing it with purpose. And we can't do that unless we have a really strong strategic plan right from the start, where we're matching our channel and our activity to the group that we're addressing, that we build in measurable outcomes, we think outcome, not only output, and we also plan in a regular review. And of course, we then need that appropriate resource in place. So next slide, please. In the document that we prepared that is downloadable, you probably will have seen this example. And I hope that it's given you some idea about how you might think about building up a stepped plan. So in this one, the issue is we need to ensure that more young people know how to code their computers. So in order to ensure that more people can actually develop more applications, can adapt and utilize technology to emerging needs. So that's the issue. Why do we need to do that? Well, of course, if we enable more young people to code, then that obviously is enormous skill that will improve their personal employment prospects. But in the wider environment, why do we need this? Well, we do hope that more young people coding will mean new innovation and will drive new overall economic benefit that will be good both for a particular company perhaps, but also for a particular sector, for a country, but also potentially global, because this area is global. So as you can see, we've laid out priorities on the left-hand side. Priority 1, policy players in education and business, because we need them to understand that there needs to be resources. for upper schools to deliver this next phase. Priority 2 is head teachers, because we need to train teachers in order to help them deliver the coding training that's required. Priority 3 is these actual teachers themselves. So these are the ones who've actually been trained and therefore are going to be delivering courses for individuals. And of course then priority 4, who you might think might have been our priority targets at the beginning. But we believe that really these are a priority 4 and need to be addressed slightly later on in the process, because we need to make sure that there is something available for them to go to. So if we excite their interest in coding, then we need to make sure that the training's in place, the resources in place, and that we've got active places to take people. So hopefully that's given you quite a solid example of how to think through what you might want to do in terms of your communications and dissemination plan. So I think the next slide is our question slide. So now it's your turn if you've got any specific questions that you'd like to raise at this particular time. So I can't see any questions. I may not be seeing the right panel, so Minerva, if you're there, could you perhaps read out the questions?
We've had no questions in the questions box yet.
Okay. Well, that either means you all are very clear, which is great. As we've said, this webinar is recorded, so you can go back and look at it at any time. I hope it's given you some really strong pointers as to how you can demonstrate that you've thought strategically about the communication dissemination plan that you are putting into your proposal. One last point I'd just like to make before we go to the final slides is that you will have to make hard choices. You don't have a bottomless pit of money. You don't have a bottomless pit of resources or time at your disposal. So it's really important that you think clearly through about who you're going to make your #1 priority and where you're going to put most of your effort. So if there are no actual questions, just go on to the next slide then, please. I'd like to just leave you with this thought. IKEA. Now you all know what that stands for, and I'm not actually going to talk about furniture, but hopefully this might be a very helpful acronym for you to take forward. So next slide, please. So the I stands for identify. Identify your priority stakeholders. The K stands for know. Know their position, their issues, their landscape, their language, and make sure you know what's relevant to them. E stands for engage. Engage with them from the beginning as far as possible of your work. Ask their advice, listen, choose and use the channels that actually they use, as well as the ones that you want to use. And then activate. Activate your connections with them. Design appropriate activities and monitor and measure the results of that work with them. Make it work for both parties. Make it work for all parties, and then you will deliver communications, dissemination, innovation, success. And obviously the key aim here with this call is to be sure that not only are you doing great research work, but actually the work, the materials, the propositions, the products, if that's what you're aiming at, are then ready for market and are going to be accepted and utilized by the key stakeholder groups. So do bear that IKEA acronym in mind. Okay, I think we do have a question here now. How much is it? Now somebody's asked, how much is it expected to cost? it's up to you. I mean, this is something that you need to think through very carefully. If you look at the average of spend on communications and dissemination across most of the research projects in Horizon 2020, it's anywhere between 5% and 15% of the total budget. And obviously that varies hugely according to the nature of the project. What's most important is that you've been clear about what it is that you want to do and why you're going to do it and what you hope to expect as a result, what kind of materials you're going to develop. Obviously there's an absolute requirement for an online presence of some kind, but obviously websites can cost anywhere from, you know, €3,000 to €30,000 plus. So it just depends entirely what you hope and want your website to achieve, for example. So I'm afraid there's no one answer. Are there any other questions? Okay, so I just want to finish by just saying that CombiBiz, the project that I coordinate, does have some opportunities that are relevant to you. We have a photo competition. You can win up to a prize worth €5,000. If you're involved in research already, then this may be of interest to you. So don't miss out on this. Next slide, please. We have bursaries and academies for projects, and some of you may be already involved in different projects that this could help you. The whole point about our academies is that we match you with mentors and experts in different areas. And if you're working in another project, but you're also putting in a proposal for SUSFOOD, then it can obviously be important for SUSFOOD as well. So do have a look at that. And then the third, next slide, please, is we also have other webinars. If you join the platform, our CombiBiz platform, you will just get occasional notifications about when webinars are taking place. And many of the topics that we're discussing on those webinars, again, will be important for SUSFOOD as well as for any other research project that you're involved in. I think we have another question in the plan here. Can you confirm that the costs of kick-off, midterm and final meetings included in the budget of comms and displan? Normally, I mean, if the comms lead is going to be responsible for running and managing these meetings, which I have to say would be highly unusual, we would expect the coordinator, I think, mostly to cover those costs, then obviously it needs to be in there. I would say probably not. I mean, the comms and dissemination plan really is more about outreach. It's not about internal communications. So that's another question that you need to be clear about. Who is going to manage your internal communications with your project team? How is that going to be done? Is it going to be a private area on your website, for example, or are you going to use maybe Dropbox for Business, for example, which is highly secure? That is something, again, that you need to discuss with your consortium. I would, as I say, my instinct is to say that the costs, other than the comms and dissemination leads paying for their travel within their own work package, that should be something that's generically put into the other side of the equation in terms of money. I think there is a recommendation that you talk to your national contact points in the guidelines as to what you can and cannot include. So that would be a good starting point. But again, this is for discussion with your consortium and also to ensure that everybody's clear. There's nothing worse than not being clear about who is doing what. Okay. I think that's all the questions. Okay, so the last opportunity is that we have an academy and an annual meeting, which is going to be in February in 2018. And I know we, CombiBiz, will be running a workshop for all the successfully funded projects. But again, for a wider perspective, you'd be very, very welcome to join our final annual meeting in February 2018. So if you join the platform, you'll get information about this deadlines, and more information about the opportunities as and when they arrive. So join the platform to receive that priority information. Next slide, please. So I think we've come to a conclusion. So one final ask, if anybody has final questions. Sorry, we have another one here. I can't see the questions all that well, actually, but anyway. Priorities do not need to be in line with the timing. No, that's a really important point. So when you are thinking about priorities, you may have a priority stakeholder who actually is much better to be approached and engaged with in year 3 than in year 1. That's a really important point. A timeline, it is a time, and somebody else has asked, it's a timeline for each type of communication. Well, yes, because obviously if you're developing your website, that's going to be continuous throughout the project. But then if you are thinking of doing something special on your website, say, for example, an animation or introducing a competition or some kind of special engagement activity, then that might be in year 2, might be in year 4. So if you've got a clear indication about where that might be, then that's important to change to think about when you'll be doing that. Social media, for example, because there is a requirement in Horizon 2020, and I'm sure there's an expectation in SUSFOOD as well, that really you will be communicating from day 1, then you need to be setting up your social media channels pretty early on. Okay, I think we can then draw this to a conclusion. We're looking forward to working in partnership going forward with SUSFOOD and all your successful projects. So my final word to you to say is good luck with your proposals. Come back to this recorded webinar if you have a moment, if you've got further questions. As I said at the beginning, we were not offering a blueprint for how to go about your communications, but hopefully we've given you a blueprint of the core questions you need to ask yourself and get the feedback from all your partners as to how you're going to drive and develop your communications and dissemination plan. And don't forget that communications and dissemination are two sides of the same coin. Think about it as a continuum. And as I said earlier, IKEA. Identify, know, engage, and activate. And I think on that note, we can say goodbye and thanks for listening.